How are you doing? I want to talk about how to read Dracula. Well, how do you read any novel, for that matter? I want to talk a little bit about this to help explain why we're going to be looking at Victorian England, and also why we might want to learn a little something about Mr. Stoker. Some people believe that to have a rich understanding of a work, to look beyond the surface of that work, that you should know something about the time in which the author wrote, something about the culture. For instance, if you read Shakespeare, you might want to study Elizabethan England. Why? Because Shakespeare wrote for an Elizabethan audience, and because so many of the references in Shakespeare and so much of the intention of the author, well, they're lost without that background. I'm not expecting you to go in depth in Victorian England or in the life of Stoker or reading about Vlad the Impaler in Romania, but perhaps just a little bit of a skeleton would help. Yeah, that was bad. When we look at Dracula, to understand how shocking a novel this is, and to understand some things about what made it such an impression over time, I really think we need to know a little something about Stoker. He wrote in Victorian England. He wrote in a period where there were certain codes of behavior that weren't broken. Kind of. You see, certain behavior was expected. And yet, when you peel away the veil of that prim and proper society in Victorian England, you find that adultery and infidelity was amazingly high. You find that prostitution was everywhere and that sexually transmitted disease flourished. And hey, isn't vampirism a disease? I'm not saying one has to do with the other, but it's something to think about. So, and isn't the behavior of a vampire shocking and against the rules? Again, I'll hold off on that because I want you to read a little bit about Victorian England before you make up your mind. Before you start to get some of your own ideas, because I want you to have fun with this. I want you to explore. And regarding Mr. Stoker, poor Mr. Stoker, you're going to see that he was considered something of an outcast. This man was part of British theater, but not necessarily the theater of Shakespeare. This was a man involved with crude or common plays would be a better term. This was the theater of dance halls and really gamey comedy, not highfalutin phrases that you'd find in Shakespeare or Marlowe. Shameless men, shameless women, and it makes you wonder if his background had anything to do with writing a tale full of violence. And some people believe a rather simplistic view of good versus evil, right and wrong, simple to the point that it could have been a biblical morality tale. So you see, understanding the culture and knowing something about the author, well, that's one approach to literature. But it isn't the only approach. We can also take a view that says it doesn't matter. That the only thing that matters is what the reader takes away from the work. It's called reader response theory. And whatever you think the book is or isn't, that's okay. As long as you back up your point of view, as long as you can go back to the text or from outside sources and say, hey, this is what I think this book is about, or this is what this book means to me, and that's fine. So I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to explore the background, Bram and his party folk, and Victorian England, and you'll have an opportunity to read a great novel. And And it's definitely fun. And while you're reading it, I want you to remember what we've said about the function of horror and catharsis. Remember that a horror novel is really a mirror of the time in which it was written. And if a novel is still appreciated, again, reader response theory, then perhaps that novel's fulfilling a function today. Dracula's changed, or at least our view of Dracula has changed. And perhaps our view of Dracula that's changed says more about us than it says about the Count. I want you to think about that. And I want you to have fun. We'll be talking later. You take care.